4 p.m. Eyewitness News. And I'm pretty much, for me, living my dream come true for a kid who grew up on, born on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I'm not here, I would not be here for some of the programs and some of the work that so many people had done before to help those who are trying to do better in their lives. My parents, like many of you here, from Puerto Rico, and they came here because they were looking for a better life. Somewhere along the line, my father found work, and they described what we were living in as today we call it the working poor. I never knew it as poverty. I was as happy a child as you could be. I look back now and I realized that there were tremendous obstacles that were in front of me and my cousins and my other family. I'm the first in my family to graduate college. And why is that possible? That's possible because of safety net programs, financial programs, affirmative action programs, some of those hot-button issues that right now people want to do away with. There's debate over, and for good reason. There's no black and white in these issues. There's always gray areas and all this. But I can tell you I'm standing here because of many of those programs and many of those efforts that have come out there. We just elected a president, and Bob was talking about this, and the anti-poverty talk was glaring in its absence in the 2012 campaign. And now we're gearing up to elect a new mayor. We're here, all of us, because of our desire to hear what is working and what is not, why this matters to us, and how we can get involved. Everyone here, you've been watching this because you came in before. There was Twitter going on, the Twitter feeds. This is the beginning of some of these conversations. This is where you can reach out to politicians, to representatives, to your neighbor, where you can get this conversation going. Hopefully you come away from this event with an idea of it being just more than a debate, and maybe there's an action that you can take in this. Let me introduce the panel, who are all experts in this field, who live and breathe what we're talking about. I'm going to have introduce you one at a time, and then I'm going to have you tell me a little about your job and what brings you here.
Our goal is really to look at the impacts of poverty and homelessness on children and families, and also to explore some of the solutions to help really mitigate the impacts of these scourges. And we really see our role here tonight as, as harkening back really to the progressive movement. When people really started looking at this issue in a scientific way and really thinking about how do we gather data, how do we explore the problem, how do we identify it so that we can really develop solutions that really hit the core of the problem. So that's really why we're here today. We really see ourselves as the organization that advocates and service providers and policymakers and researchers can turn to for information about this issue and how they can better advocate and make change within their own communities.
Thanks. Melissa, tell us about you and your organization.
Sure. So Half and 10 is a project of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and the Coalition on Human Needs to build the political and public will to cut poverty in half in 10 years. And the report grew out, the campaign grew out of a report that came out in 2007 that showed that we actually could cut poverty in half in 10 years. This wasn't some pie in the sky goal, but it was something that was within reach if we mustered the political will to get there. And it showed that, for example, just 3 steps, raising the minimum wage to its historic level, making the tax code work better for low-wage working families, and providing available affordable child care to all who qualified would get us more than halfway to a goal of cutting poverty in half in 10 years. And so following up on that, these partners came together and said, we need to mobilize public support with an achievable target in a timeline to get people mobilized to lobby their legislators around moving these policy recommendations forward. And so the campaign was born of that. And since that time, we've partnered with hundreds of groups and organizations across the country, really working in their own communities, benefiting from their own local wisdom, and trying to figure out how we can work together to achieve a lot of the goals that have been discussed already.
Oh, thanks. Maya, tell us about the Center for Social Inclusion.
Well, I thought you were going to ask why I was here, and I was going to get to say it's because Mark told me I had to come.
That's good enough.
I decided sometime, I think it was September or October, that I would have to go anywhere he told me to. But the Center for Social Inclusion is a national policy strategy organization. And I actually just got back from Louisiana where we were working with community groups of color on transit access. And one of the leaders said, if you don't know better, you don't do better. And I thought that was actually much better sum of what we try to support people doing, which is, in order to build a country that is structured in a way that works for all of us, and we argue for solutions that work for everyone, we have to know better to do better. And what that means is we have to understand the way that race plays out in how society is structured, and how that actually explains some of why so many of us, no matter our race, have such tremendous need. And so one of the things that we do is we look at the policies, the ideas that help support more what we call social inclusion, which we believe is the highest aspiration of the country, even if that's not necessarily the language we use, which really just means, it's the definition of equity, which is there's a floor beneath which none of us fall. But in order to make sure that that floor is really an inclusive floor, that really means that communities of color, as well as white communities, are not falling beneath the floor, we have to be willing to look at how each community is doing and how solutions need to be implemented in order to affect all communities. And so we look at the policy ideas that promote that, we look at the leadership, so that leaders on the ground are actually innovating, creating and innovating the policy ideas that make that change. And then we do a lot of work on communication strategy on how we talk about race, so that we're not talking about racism, we're talking about how all communities, no matter their race, are able to participate fully in society.
Thank you. And Christopher, Legislative Affairs, PolicyLink, tell me about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sure. PolicyLink is a national research and advocacy institute based in California. We do a number of projects around the country. I lead our legislative affairs work in Washington, D.C. Part of what PolicyLink is about is really trusting the good work that many of you in the room are doing, and people in communities across the country, really trusting in that people who are doing this work know the answers on how to tackle poverty. The challenge and the hard work really comes in our mission is to help lift that up into actual policy. What are the programs and services that many of the folks right here in the room are doing that we know produce results? How does that actually translate into policy, whether you're talking about state or federal or even local policy? And so a good part of what PolicyLink is about is translating that into solid policy processes. Typically when we, or historically when we look at policy, it's very much done from a top-down approach. Some people get in a room, they look at some data, it's usually not as diverse as this stage, and they make some decisions, and they say, we're just going to do this program, we're going to put some money over here and put money over here, and that'll solve the problem. But rarely do we ever get the opportunity to listen to the communities who have some of the answers. And so that is what PolicyLink is about, is to help shift that a bit, to make sure that the community plays a central role in the policy process.
Thanks. Chris, I'm going to stay with you for a second. Because one of the things we're going to definitely talk about during the course of this panel are some of the ideas that are out there that seem to work, and that we can maybe get something from and move forward. But before we go to that point of it, if there is all these ideas that work, the big issue is the will to make them work. And I mean, you heard Bob talking about that before. Right now, the political discussion is about the middle class. The political discussion is about the deficit. It's about reducing, our burden in terms of how we're going to pay debts. Do we legitimately, and if not, do we have the will at this point to do anything about poverty? Christopher.
There are a few great leaders who have taken that leadership role. I think as a collective, as a body, particularly in my context in Washington, D.C., the answer is no. The political will to really address poverty in a really serious way that really gets to the heart of those solutions, right now, unfortunately, the answer would be no.
All right, and by the way, if I ask a question to any of you members of council and you think you want to add something to it, don't feel like this is a question directed to just one person. You want to follow up on any of that. So do any of you ever think there's a political will here?
Yeah, I would just add one thing, because I certainly agree with Chris that we have a failure of political will in terms of elected officials. But that's very different from, I think, the public's political will. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing, given the hard times that so many people have faced, and even if they personally haven't faced it, that they've seen family members, friends, neighbors face, is that there's a lot more willingness to invest in people, which is really all we're talking about, is whether we're going to invest in our people. There's a lot more will for that, and there's really a disconnect between, frankly, from redistricting processes that have solidified highly partisan districts in a way that actually shifts the conversation from the actual bipartisan agreement I think we can create on some of these issues.
And just building upon what Maya said, I think there is some public will. I think what is missing is the advocacy and the movement behind it, as Bob said, to translate it into policy. You know, Franklin Roosevelt had a famous quote with a labor leader who said, "Go out and make me do it." You know, I think we have, you know, some elected officials right now who could be persuaded to take up more of a leadership role if there was a movement behind them. And we've been pushing them to take leadership for a long time. I think it's incumbent upon us at this point to really mobilize ourselves and to hold them accountable to doing more on these issues.
You know, it's difficult when you talk about political will, and you know, you look at President Obama. I knew President Obama as a community activist. His message in the early days was about poverty, and that did not come up very limitedly in this campaign, because I think he knew the political reality that the conversation, if he wanted to get elected to have a say in something, had to do with dealing with, most importantly, jobs. That was one of the big issues he had to deal with. And let me ask you, panel, does anyone want to take this question? I don't have to deal with it directly. But how important is jobs to the whole picture of dealing with poverty?
Really important. And, you know, wages are obviously critically important because we have a lot of people who work in this country who are still poor. But there's no question that when we look at poverty, a lot of, you know, let's just talk about one issue, because as I said, I was working on transportation issues in Louisiana this week. And if you look at what's happening, we've been disinvesting in public transit. In fact, we've been investing most of our public dollars in highways and very little of it in public transit. And the Congress actually, in the last year, was arguing about whether to have any public dollars go to public transit. And, you know, there literally only 25% of low-skilled and medium-skilled jobs in this country are located within 90 minutes of public transit. And in the Black community, we're 6 times more likely, as well as the Latino community, 6 times more likely to rely on public transit to get to work. So it's both a jobs question in terms of creating the jobs, but it's also a jobs question in terms of accessing the jobs. And that's something we have to really think seriously about.
Just to piggyback on what Maya was talking about, it's not only access and actually being able to get the jobs and get to the jobs, but then also being able to get the job in the first place. And, you know, bring education into this, just because I feel like if we have, you know, over half of our young people not graduating from high school in New York City, what kind of jobs can we expect for them to get that are going to be able to have them support and maintain strong, stable households and families? So, you know, if they don't have the skills that they need in order to get the jobs in the first place, that's another access question as well.
Yeah, it really is a big puzzle in many ways to how you fit that bridge, you create that bridge to get you to that place. People always think of the end result. Well, how come you don't have the job? You know, couldn't get the job. And all these things that were going in the way that caused the problem. You know, I was talking about the political discussion in the presidency about poverty, and believe it or not, this is interesting. I came up with one quote, and that was Paul Ryan that said, many voters don't think of or know that we have good ideas in fighting poverty and helping people move up the ladder of life. And so, because they don't think that there are ideas out there, they kind of dismiss that they don't exist and it's not possible. If you could tell me a little bit about your program. You were saying before that you're going to have, Melissa, poverty's going to be halved in 10 years. I mean, it sounds like a crazy notion. How do you do it?
So it's not crazy, I promise. In fact, it's not even crazy in this context of deficit reduction, because one of the things we need to do is get out of this mindset of being on the defensive, because when you're in this crouched defensive posture, it's very difficult to do anything other than prevent worse things from happening. We childhood on putting poverty reduction, not caseload reduction, back at the center of our programs. And so one of the things that we did this past year to show that is we put out a budget plan that cut poverty in half while balancing the budget by 2030 at the same time. And made the point that it's very much about the budget choices that we make. That budgets are moral documents as much as they are economic or political documents. And that if you were to put choices next to each other, he showed, for example, that preserving a provision in the estate tax that was helping the very, very top 0.2% of households keep more wealth, letting that expire would preserve 280,000 children getting school lunch for the next 10 years. I mean, when you present those kinds of choices to the American people, they're squarely on the side of investing in people. And so some of the things that we've done, I mentioned earlier, the study we did that showed that increasing the minimum wage, child care, and earned income and child tax credit reforms would lift huge numbers of people out of poverty. But in addition to that, with the kind of slow recovery that we've had that has not produced the number of jobs we need, we also need to be thinking innovatively about how we create jobs. Infrastructure, transportation is huge. Another piece is subsidized employment, pairing people in need of work with work in need of doing in communities. We all see projects throughout our communities that need to be done, and people out of work. Small amounts of government investments to spur nonprofits and small businesses, hiring folks to do that has been proven a very effective strategy to put people back to work while increasing community capital and infrastructure. So that's one other idea that we've really been pushing hard.
So, a lot of ideas out there. And please, I urge any of you, if you hear something you like, tweet it out, send the word out on some of these ideas, and maybe some of this stuff will get viral. Still, with those ideas, is this the time for some of those ideas? Clearly, we're still recovering from being on the brink of a depression, one of the most worst economic times since the Depression. And we're looking at a looming deficit here that is just taking out of control. Now I'm going to go to you, Wiley, because I know that we get some strong feelings about this. Is poverty solvable now?
Well, so poverty is, I think one of the big lies we have been told is that poverty is intractable, that it has always been with us and it will always be with us. So, one question for the audience: how old is the American middle class? How long have we had one? The policies that we started putting in place to create a middle class that we did not have for the vast majority of the history of this country started with policies of the New Deal, moving into the policies of the Fair Deal. And so our own history shows that it's actually not true, that we can create policies that invest in people. That was literally the GI Bill, that was housing and supporting. By 1950, the mid-1950s, the federal government was underwriting 50% of all home mortgages, just not in Black and Latino communities. And so when we actually see how, when we talk about this permanent underclass, right? We've heard this conversation about this permanent underclass as if it's something that's always been there and will always be there. It's really about how our policies have not been fair to all the people who should have been benefiting from them. And so our failure to pay attention to communities of color and how we support community of color access into the middle class has become part of the myth that it's permanent. And that somehow people who are poor are responsible for their poverty, not the fact that we didn't create these programs. And if you look at, Mr. Herbert already said this, we're one of the richest countries in the world. Of the top 35 countries, we're the second in child poverty, second only to Romania. And it's because of the policies of those countries that they have such low poverty rates. It's because they have much higher taxation and many, many, many more public benefit programs, including universal health care that nobody pays for, including 6 weeks of paid maternity leave. In this country, we literally, in New York City, 4 out of 10 parents of public school students, and both my daughters are in public school, in our neighborhood public school, 4 out of 10 cannot miss a day of work or they will not be paid. And 3.5 days of missed work is a month's grocery bill.
Let me just, stay with you on this point for a second, because it goes back to the political will. You mentioned about Europe having universal health care. You talked about the tax mortgage benefits. The reality is, this is a spoiled country. Do we want to wait? Your universal health usually means long waits for that medical procedure that you want. And a lot of people here in New York, you can't wait for life to change. You're asking for people to, pay higher taxes. Higher taxes? Don't say that too loud, because if someone hears that out in the street, there could be a riot. That's like the worst thing you could say to the American people right now.
Do you know what the top marginal tax rate was in 1944?
Over 90%.
94%. 94%. 94%.
Can you convince?
We're complaining about 39% right now.
Right.
But here's my point. When you look at how the public conversation happens, what is happening actually is a very small percentage of the political right is controlling the conversation about what the public wants. And when you look at polls, in California, there was a poll that found that the majority of Californians would favor paying more in taxes if for public education, and that a disproportionate amount of those public education dollars should go to disadvantaged schools. So that tells me that this whole debate about public will is more about the attention that a very few get, because they're able to be politically mobilized in a very effective way and garner a significant percentage of the press. That is very different from any of the conversations that we have when we're just in homes, when we're in communities, and when we even look at polling and other testing that shows what Americans are willing to pay for.
And just building on that, because I think Bob's point earlier mentioned income inequality and the sort of divergence of wealth and income. And that has implications not just for poverty, but for democracy more broadly, because it means that a smaller and smaller percentage of voices are having more and more concentrated power in setting the agenda and who is sitting around that table. So there's not just implications in terms of economic power, there's implications in terms of political power, which then gets into this vicious cycle.
Well, Donna, let me direct this on the same thing. Where do we focus our resources right now for there to be change?
Well, you know, there are a few different things that you could sort of, you know, there's always sort of the employment and the education. You can always sort of do big, you know, that's where we should invest our money. But if I had to sort of really, you know, direct this question to say a mayoral candidate or something like that, then, you know, I would say, and I was glad to hear what you said earlier, the bang for your buck is in early childhood education. That's where you get a big bang for your buck. And we have to stop thinking about our budgets and the money that we spend on public programs as expenses and start thinking of them as investments. You're not spending on childcare, you are investing in childcare. And we have to get politicians, they may know this, but they have to speak about it in that way, and they have to lead in that way. They have a voice that no one else has. More people will listen to them, and they have an opportunity to craft that message. And if they can understand that if you do this now for 5 years, you will see a lifetime of benefits. If as a private business owner, if I had a return on investment at the same rate that you see with early childhood ed, I would do it in a heartbeat. There's just no argument.
There's a lot of reason to fight poverty, a lot of reason to invest in our people, our youth, a lot of reason to invest in the family, but we don't. Why is that?
For your term limits.
No, very smart lady at my organization, our founder, likes to say, we're not a poor country, we need to stop acting like it. And I think that really just captures, like I said, everything that we're saying here today. I mean, the money is there, we're choosing it to put in certain places and not in others. It's really about the choice. And back to Maya's point, it's our job to make that will at the forefront of the political debate. Back to the jobs question for a second, because a lot of times I think we oversimplify the equation here about what jobs really means. There's so many angles at which, back to education, whether you're talking about trade, whether you're talking about training to get people into the right jobs, the housing, the transportation, infrastructure, all these things that create what we call communities of opportunity. And illustrated that, what does a community that has access to jobs really look like? What do the schools look like? What do the streets look like? What does the transportation system look like? Right, so all these things in terms of land use policy, all these things that we can probably get up here and get real wonky in a minute about what these things sound like, but these are real things that really come from public investments. And right now, the public conversation is going the other way.
Right. You know, let me stay with you for a second, Chris. PolicyLink, you come at the issue of poverty from a little bit of a different vantage point than some of the others, in terms of looking more at replicating projects that work. You know, using these, you know, lifting up what works is, I think, one of your themes. Let's talk about something that works. How do we lift that up, and how do we get that message out?
Glad you asked that. I mean, there's several projects that we work on both locally and nationally that exemplify what you're asking. One is right here up the street in Harlem, New York. Most of you are pretty familiar, I'm sure, with the Harlem Children's Zone, where Jeff Canada and his team were able to essentially help crack the code on what it means for a child living in poverty to do well in school and to actually break the generational cycle of poverty. And so a good part of my day and my work is to help find ways to help other communities do the same thing. Every community isn't going to look at state, regions, and stands. graduating and going to college, bringing $7.5 million back into the community through a tax program that's made available to residents. All these things can be replicated. And so we are part of an effort that is helping over 60 communities across the country do a similar outcome.
Sort of back to my point earlier about how we don't just need to be on defense, but that we need to be sort of setting forth a vision for what we want and pushing the president and pushing members of Congress to do the same. We have a campaign going on right now called Talk Poverty on Twitter, where the theme is leaders inspiring leaders. It's asking people to think about who inspires them to care about poverty, whether it's your mom or Martin Luther King or a mayor in your town, whatever it is. And to share that with the president, with asking him to talk about his solutions in the State of the Union and in his budget. And then we're going to pivot and take that campaign to members of Congress as we approach some of these budget talks in February and have them really hear from people on Twitter, on Facebook, and through email about the ways in which they need to protect low-income people, as well as set forth a proactive agenda. And so if you go to www.halfandten.org/talkpoverty, we have a whole bunch of sample tweets and resources there for how you can plug in, sign up to get involved in the campaign, and take action every day in your community.
You know, as you were telling that story, I started to think about my own personal story a little bit. You know, I told you when I first introduced myself to all of you that, I started out, we didn't have money, and along the way, I decided that I was going to go to Good Name College, and my father kind of laughed, because nobody had gone to college at that point, and I said, no, I'm going to go. And I don't know how, I took as many jobs as I could, and then suddenly, and this applies to any young folks out there, I applied for every possible scholarship, grant, program. I had no idea what I was applying for. I had a very, energetic financial aid counselor who submitted me for a kid that didn't know how to do it himself. It's every program that could be possible. And suddenly, I would get letters, and I would get phone calls, and I would get, you got a scholarship, you got this, you got $1,000 here, you got $1,000, you get a work study program here. And next thing I knew, I was able to graduate. And then beyond that, it goes into the race issue that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to follow up with you in my own. I then was lucky enough to come at a time to the workplace where there was a heightened sensitivity towards hiring, in my case, Latinos, minorities, people of color, so adding diversity. And so here comes a guy that comes in, possibly right time, right place, and they go, oh, you know what, we're not looking for Latinos. They don't say it out loud, but just, they're on the Novarro. Wow, that's, what is that? What is that? Is that Italian? No, it's Puerto Rican. So you're like, okay, I see what the game is. And regardless, I broke into a business that was part of an old boy network. And slowly these things were happening. So there are positive sides because of people's hard work in the past, but obviously there's still negative sides. Talk to me, you bring it up in what you do in terms of the impact racism has in poverty.
So, it's so complicated because there's racism. A lot of it is actually unconscious. In other words, there's studies that show that if you have a resume with a person's name on it that sounds Afrocentric, and you have a name of a person sounds very white, and there are identical resumes in terms of educational background, skills, and experience, the data shows that it is the white person who will get the interview, and the black person, the person with the name that sounds black, will not even get the interview. And that often the interviewer is not even necessarily conscious that they're reading that way, right? So I think one of the things that we get confused about in society is that if people of color are being excluded from opportunity, then it must mean there's some Bull Connor type person who is intentionally keeping people from opportunity. And it's actually much more complicated than that. But it's also much more complicated from a policy front. I mean, because so often we have race-neutral policy that's universal and sounds really good. It doesn't mean we'll all benefit from it equally. And I'll give you one example. I think it's incredibly important that we pass the Affordable Care Act. I personally supported it, so I don't say this to say that it was unimportant from a policy standpoint. But we have a lot of experience with communities of color being on Medicaid, and they don't get to see doctors. because they don't have the healthcare infrastructure in communities. So simply having a race-neutral policy that says, well, now everybody who's 133% or below the poverty line will now have the ability to have an insurance card. There's a study that shows that only insurance does not, insurance actually only counts for 42% of a Black or Latino person's ability to get health care. And that's because there are all these other issues of infrastructure, whether doctors are in the community. Most of our communities now have hospitals closing. And this is for a lot of reasons that have to do with the economics of healthcare, but are nonetheless hitting our communities very, very differently. I mean, even the issue of education is a critically important issue. We have to have early childhood. I went to public school. I went to an inner city public school in Washington, D.C. I was one of the only students in a school with thousands of kids that was not on welfare. I had two parents who had graduate degrees. I went to school, started kindergarten, knowing how to read. By second grade, I was 2 years behind grade level, and I was at the top of my class. And that wasn't about my early childhood experience. That was about how the schools were so disinvested in, how you can't have 6 teachers in 1 year and learn. You can't have teachers that are teaching 30 kids with not even one paraprofessional, no support on disability, and expect any student to do well, any student. And all the statistics show that by 3rd grade, particularly for students of color, student achievement plummets, and a lot of that is fixable. But it's also not race neutral. And it's also not about racism. It's not about people wanting bad things to happen in communities of color. And so we have to really be willing to look at race and understand it's not about pointing a finger, it's about solving a problem.
I'd like to, as a note, if you have questions, we have some staff that are going to take those questions now. So pass them down to the end of your aisle for the questions, and then we're going to bring them up in a moment and read some. In the meantime, Donna, I'm going to direct the next question to you. You deal with homelessness all the time. You see, that's about as bottom as you can be in a life when you have no home and you're struggling with it. 2011, the president picked considered one of the most academic thinkers on equality, Princeton economist Alan Kruger. You can doubt it, but he's got a pretty good reputation. And he led his Council of Economic Advisors. About a year ago, Kruger gave a speech on what he called the Great Gatsby Curve, warning against the economic dangers of falling inequality. It's not far from what Mark was talking about. The world of Oliver has come to live here in New York City. What is the reality that's going on in the city out there right now when it comes to homelessness?
Well, it's not a pretty picture. We have recently broken the record for the number of kids who are homeless and in shelter in New York City. It's over 20,000 children. When we look at the real picture of what homeless kids face, it's not only kids who are living in shelter, it's kids who are doubled up. It's kids who are living in unstable situations, hotels, motels, cars, etc. Just in New York City, that number is about 7%. And when you do the math, what that actually means is that there's more than one homeless child in every single classroom in New York City. When you think about it, every single classroom in New York City has at least one homeless kid in it, on average, of course. But still, so that's really the scope of the problem that we're talking about. We're talking about, and we're talking about kids here. There's a singles population, of course, and they face oftentimes different challenges than what some of our families face. But if we don't remember that this is a children's issue, this is a child's problem, and a parent can make all kinds of bad decisions about how they have lived their life, but that 3-year-old never gets a chance to be 3 years old again. That 4th grader is never going to be in 4th grade again. And that's what we really have to remember when it comes to homelessness. Kids need stability. They need their school more than anything else. For many of the kids that we see in New York City, the school is really the center. It's their center point of stability. Sometimes that also they receive that sort of function in a shelter setting, depending on what other services are available there. But really making sure that kids get the access to schools, and not only the chance and the access to school, but all the other services that they are in fact entitled to because they are homeless. Kids don't, homeless kids need more. You know, we talk about the issue of equality. Yes, everyone would like to have an equal access to opportunity and access to school, but these kids don't have it. For them, school is also where they get their food, where they get their clothing, where they get their health care. So, you know, to recognize the role that schools play in the lives of these kids, and the federal budget for the McKinney-Vento Act that funds services for homeless kids across the country is $65 million. Million with an M, not with a B. $65 million for all the homeless kids in K-12 in America. This is scandalous. So that's really, you know, I mean, when we talk about the issue of homelessness, it's easy to sort of generalize what we think about the issue as, oh, that guy on the corner asking for spirit change. That's not actually the whole picture. There's a lot of children out there and families who are suffering from this, and we're seeing it. You know, it's not just those who are really in dire and the most poor families who are coming in the shelter system anymore. We're seeing a lot of folks who have, you know, sort of clawed their way to the middle class and are falling back into the shelter system and into services through foreclosures, the economic crisis. There's a lot of factors that go into that. But all of the services and the programs that we're talking about here today really can have a huge impact in helping to make sure that these kids get to keep their childhood.
Christopher, let me just ask you a quick question, and then I'm going to take some of the questions that we got from the audience. And anybody else wants to jump in. As you remember from the campaign, one of the big hot topics became the issue of the role of government in dealing with poverty, the role of government in dealing with some of these safety net programs. What do you think, Chris? You're dealing with policy all the time, legislators. How much of it is about the government stepping in? How much is about the common man stepping up?
It's about both. It has to be about both, but the political will question comes about, particularly around the role of government. And I think Maya hit on it earlier. I mean, if you look historically, the government has always played a central role here. And so I think...
Should it?
Who else? We have to
does not believe the government should be involved.
Yeah, I haven't heard the other reasonable alternative when it comes to who's going to maintain the streets and creating these communities, who's going to fund public schools, who's going to make sure that the tax code is fair for those who don't make over a certain amount. If it's not the government's role, I mean, again, who would regulate that type of thing? I think there's some common denominators, though, that we've seen where some policies that can be implemented through the government that really buttress a lot of the commentary about the role of government, or that it may cost too much. It doesn't cost anything to have the right people at the table, for instance. It doesn't cost much to make sure that your approaches to policy actually are targeted to specific communities, and that you're not trying to make a one-size-fit-all approach to tackling poverty or addressing any of the major issues we're talking about. And the other piece here is around evidence-based. No one is asking for a bunch of money to go out the door without any accountability. And so some of those things that I think could be just part of more of our narrative when we're talking about policy and politics and how, I think we'd be a lot further along.
Say one thing,
sure.
Because I think you've raised really the central point in our political debate, which is, are people poor because of their own failure to make a good choice or to be willing to work, or are people poor because we've not set in place sufficient supports that help people actually help themselves? And one of the things that's happened is it's actually been, and I think it's really important that we understand this, it's been a concerted strategy by some who don't believe in big government for social programs, because it's a myth that anybody in Congress is opposed to big government. The question is, big government for what? Is it big government for military and for a criminal justice system? Or is it big government for people? Because actually, the same folks that claim that government should not be big are the same folks that have ensured its massive expansion for killing people and incarcerating people. So it's actually a false discussion. It's really a discussion that's been an attack on government and an attack on actually individual responsibility, suggesting that people don't want to be and aren't doing the right thing. So ignoring the woman who's working 12 hours a day and still cannot pay the food bill at the end of the month, right? We're ignoring her. But I think the hope here is it has been a concerted strategy to create this dichotomy of big government versus small government. And one of the things that President Obama did, I thought, this speech, this inauguration was much better than 2008. But one of the things that he did really well in 2008, I thought, that he did not repeat throughout his administration after that inaugural speech, was to say it's not about big government or small government. It's about smart government. Smart government invests in solutions because at the end of the day, government is us. And it's our leadership, and it's the way we take leadership. And if you don't believe that, you don't believe in democracy, and you're not a patriot. That's my position.
I'm going to try to get to some of your questions now. There's so many. I don't know how many we'll be able to get to. We'll try to get to as many as possible now. The organizers here, I assume you want me to read the questions. Is that correct? And then direct it to the panel? I'll say that as a yes until I hear a screaming no. Okay. You talk about, priorities, funding priorities. And here's a question. Let's see the name, but I'll just ask it. Is there any funding available for deferred action childhood arrivals? Each applicant is a total of $465, and some are 18 and older who have no family support. Anyone want to take that one on? Is there any funding available for deferred action childhood arrivals? I don't know what that is. Okay, so you got us on that one. Sorry, you can't answer that one. Let's go to a simpler one, I think a very direct one. This one's from Hillary. And she says, I'm an urban planner. How do natural disasters like Katrina and Sandy impact your work?
Yeah, there's a PhD dissertation about that.
Right.
Well, I'll actually take that one just very briefly, since we're here in New York City and we're really dealing with the impacts of Hurricane Sandy, and it's been sort of interesting to see how the fallout of everything that's happened afterwards, because we're seeing a rise in the numbers of families in the shelter system that's not attributed yet to the hurricane and the victims of the hurricane. So we're really expecting and trying to sort of get ready, because there is the anticipation that after FEMA funding runs out, there's still going to be a tidal wave of families. We have 40,000 families who are displaced, that we can expect to really see that in the public system, whether it's 6 months from now or 18 months from now. We really expect to see that sooner rather than later, frankly.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, because it's actually our failure to invest in infrastructure is actually one of the reasons why we've seen such vulnerability in communities when we get these kinds of big... disasters aren't natural. Storms are natural, hurricanes are natural, but their impact is really about whether we prepare sufficiently for them. So there's no such thing as a natural disaster. The disaster is the impact. And one of the things we saw, we did a lot of work as the PolicyLink in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana for years post, both at the time of Hurricane Katrina and even we're still doing work in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama today. And a lot of it is to fight for infrastructure spending that actually makes communities more resilient, and particularly communities of color, because again, that's where some of the infrastructure is least invested in and most needed. And so we always think you target dollars to where need is greatest, not where need is not very significant, and that means really looking at where infrastructure investments have gone. And New York was no different, because when you look at what happened, particularly with public housing residents, most people don't realize that in addition to being predominantly people of color, it's over 90%, half of all residents work. And the other half that doesn't, because 56% of the population is either over 62 or under 21. So these are working families. And the New York City Housing Authority has been disinvested in for the past 2 decades. And so people's inability to, in Red Hook or in any of the other communities, Coney Island, to get there, to be 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after the storm, still without heat, still without electricity, was about NYCHA's 1930s buildings that had not been upgraded and updated, and had to send for boilers from Kentucky and actually totally replace the boiler system. I mean, that's the kind of insanity we have, because we have been refusing to keep NYCHA's budget building the infrastructure of public housing.
All right, this is an issue that came up during the campaign, class warfare
question. How do you raise the issue of poverty without vilifying wealthy individuals? Don't laugh over there, Bob. I'll make you answer this one. You got a shot at it? Go ahead.
I don't think you need to vilify wealthy individuals. You know, what you need to do is talk about having an equitable society. I mean, you know, if somebody's got $10 billion and they're trying to get $20 billion, I mean, that's sort of what they do. There's a reason why you're supposed to have a tax code and you're supposed to have some kind of government laws and regulations that prevent the society from getting so imbalanced that everything else gets out of whack. And what happens, and we saw this in the Depression, we had this extraordinary level of inequality in the years leading up to the Great Depression. And that threw everything out of balance, out of whack. You had a terrible collapse. It was terrible for wealthy people. It is actually much better for the rich if we have a more equitable society, if we have a society with a strong middle class in the United States and where everyone is doing well. 70% of economic activity in the United States of America is consumer spending. So you need to have people having an income and actually spending money to keep the economy strong. If most of that money gets concentrated in the zones right up at the top of the economic pyramid, you don't have enough spending to keep the economy whole, to keep it going strong. And I think that's very much what we're going through now. I think the economy remains weak, the recovery has remained weak, because there are too many people who are unemployed and underemployed. So you don't need to vilify the rich. What you need to do is mobilize everyone who is not rich to become more active on behalf of a fairer and equitable society.
Oh, when you answer a question, you don't mess around.
I wanted to just add to that. Go ahead. Because I think to Bob's point, we've done a lot of research. We actually issued a report last year on this very topic about income inequality, but also general inequity and how it actually hurts the national economy. And when you look at the data, and particularly when you think about the demographic shifts and the trends of the majority of children born today are children of color. And when you look at, and so by the, I think by year 2042, this is going to be a majority of people of color nation. And so if these are the same people and the same communities that we're divesting in right now, what is our economy going to look like in 30 years? And so what types of investments do we need to start making now to make sure? So it's no longer going to be this dichotomy or question about vilifying rich or poor. We're all going to be in a dire situation in the next several decades if the national economy cannot sustain itself because of these disinvestments.
I think it gets to the point that increasing opportunity for all leads to a stronger American economy. That when you have a strong middle class, as Bob said, you have more consumer purchasing power, you have a more educated workforce, you have a stronger democracy. This notion of shared prosperity, not that rich people have to do worse for me to do better, but that we can all do better together if the right rules are in place to allow everyone to participate equitably. Building on Chris's point, I think, a lot of times when we talk about communities of color, we talk about disparities, and it's important to note those. But it's also important to note, as he said, that this is going to be the majority of our workforce. The communities of color are starting businesses. That diverse workforces tend to do better. That when we are inclusive and when we have a more diverse and inclusive society, we all do better. And so I think taking it away from this frame of us versus them, but having it really be about how we all do better when we all do better.
Is some of what you guys...
No, I think it's the best form of capitalism. It's saying that we all do better when there's a strong middle class, and that when people are able to go out to have to earn wages that allow them to purchase things in the economy, to have a trade policy that allows more exports and more American goods to go out there. No one is saying that we shouldn't have capitalism, but we shouldn't have capitalism run amok. There has to be rules of the road so that capitalism can flourish, and that there's a basic floor below which no one can fall.
Is that part of the issue right there? Is that the playing field is not the same for everyone when it comes to who is going to take advantage of the parameters of the capitalist society we got now?
Well, you know, think about it this way. We have a tax code that says if you own 2 homes, you can take deductions on both of them, right? And if we eliminated the second home mortgage deduction, that would be another way in which we could. But that's not class warfare to say, wow, everyone should be able to be encouraged to own a home. Why do you need to be encouraged to own 2? I mean, it's great if you can, but why should you be incentivized to own 2? Because right now the incentive structures are part of what keeps us from being able to invest. But one of the things I want to say, because I agree with everything that's been said, dealing with race is both having a frame that it's an us, it's a we, but it also means being able to racialize that frame. And we're actually doing some testing right now on this, which I can't talk about, so don't tell anybody. It's a secret. But it's really about how we show images of people of all races and talk about their contributions to society, not their earnings. So, and being able to do that across race and also across income categories. And then part of what we're playing with is, can then you start to raise questions about who isn't contributing good things? Because, you know, the truth is we do have to have some ability to argue that it's okay for certain people to pay more, right? Particularly corporations that might be causing huge amounts of environmental damage and not actually paying for it. So, do you produce oil spills, or do you produce healthy environments? So we do have to, because I think that's not class warfare as much as saying everybody has to do the right thing, and that does include corporations, CEOs, and I think it's okay to find a formula that's not class warfare at the same time that it enables us to open up a conversation about what is fair.
But you have to admit, though, it's right on the top we were saying that there was a study that came out of this today that the structure that's in place in terms of the tax structure is disproportionately more impactful on the poor than it is on the rich. So there's the structure we're working within. How do you change that? That's part of the discussion we're having right now. I want to get to some more questions. This is one on the minimum wage. And I don't know if any of you can answer this at this point. Maybe you give it a shot. Or what would the minimum wage have to be raised to it to be livable? Anybody want to guess at that?
Or to be, what's the last one? Livable.
To be at the right place.
That's exactly it. And that's another example of where we try to come up with a one-size-fit-all policy or number that can work in New York City in the same way that it would work in Lubbock, Texas. Yeah. That cannot work. So a livable wage is actually what we advocate for pretty strongly, but that can change depending on the community that we're talking about. We're also talking about the type of jobs that we're thinking about. What is livable, right? Because once you get there, I think you're debunking a whole lot about, oh, we don't have the money because you're going to create this race to the bottom, and businesses are not going to know how to plan and do their tax.
Well, I mean, I agree with that.
New York City, $22 is the housing wage.
Right.
That's a good answer.
And Jacksonville, Florida did something that was very creative, and they even got support from the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm not sure how they did that, but where they tagged for any business receiving incentives to locate in Jacksonville had to commit to paying a percentage of the median state household income, so that it was actually tagged to a median income for the whole state, which was their way of ensuring that whatever that was, because it will fluctuate too, right? That it would be a fair wage so I just thought that was a creative formula for doing what Chris is talking about.
I also just think it's important to note how much the minimum wage has eroded since it was first set in real terms. Because in the 1960s, the minimum wage was something like 50% of the average income. And today it's more like 30% or something like that. I mean, it has eroded enormously. Congress has voted themselves many pay raises since that time, but we have not indexed the minimum wage to any kind of standard, whether it's inflation or the average wage. And if the minimum wage were what it was in the 1960s, if we had been indexing it all this time, it would be around $10 an hour today. I'm not saying that's the living wage you would need, but I'm saying that's how far we've moved backwards in terms of what's been the minimum floor that's acceptable.
I don't think anyone who works a full-time job should make a salary that puts them below the poverty line. space. So whatever it takes.
And the capital line is not enough to make ends meet.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. They're all great questions. Bloomberg has cut, I believe this is correct, $173 million in human services in New York. What impact does that have, and what can be done now? Dash wants to know.
Yay. Well, you know, I mean, the good thing about New York City is that we also have a city council. So the mayor can propose a budget, but the city council can also come in and sort of help along and help him readjust his priorities. So oftentimes we do benefit from a lot of lobbying from local groups. When I say lobbying, I really mean advocacy from local groups to their city council members to help restore some of these budget cuts. You know, and I really feel like that's probably one of our most effective ways to actually make changes like this happen in the city, simply because, you know, Bloomberg's got a year left. You know, he's you know. So really, I think, you know, if I had to advise anyone about what to do, it's talk to your local city council member and really make it very concrete for him or her in their particular district, in your neighborhood. What does it actually mean? They, you know, those are the stories that they listen to. It's your local daycare center. It's your local after-school program. Those are the two things that are on the chopping block for this year, again. So, you know, or whatever other social services they're talking about. Those, you know, talk to your local city council members, because they're the ones who are going to take it back to the city council and then have that fight with the mayor's office.
Well, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Bob.